Very good evening and welcome to yet another episode of On the Record. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. Now, on tonight's show, South African Communist Party leader Jeremy Cronin tells us why he thinks former President Thabo Mbeki's version of the truth is a bit problematic. And in our debate slot, self-confessed socialist and worker leader Irvin Jim goes head-to-head with no-nonsense free marketeer Leon Lowe of the Free Market Foundation. And of course, later on, a little something from DA leader Maimana's version of I Have a Dream. To our first story now. Well, former President Thabo Mbeki yesterday put a cat among pigeons, accusing long-serving Communist Party Deputy Secretary Jeremy Cronin of once fabricating a story concerning the work of the then National Executive Committee of the ANC. In an essay partly entitled, "When Your Position Can't Be Sustained, Create a Scarecrow," Mbeki paints an unflattering picture of his erstwhile comrade. Well, Jeremy Cronin joins us from our Cape Town studios. Mr. Cronin, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Vuyo.
Well, let's start by perhaps establishing the facts first. Did you give Dr. Helena Sheehan that interview, and what did you say to her?
I actually, back in 2001 and then early in 2002, gave two fairly extensive interviews to the Irish academic Dr. Sheehan. She was also a left and former member of the Irish Communist Party. And she asked a number of probing and I think important and challenging questions. I think like many people who'd been involved as she had in the anti-apartheid movement, by the early 2000s she was quite disappointed at the trajectory that the ANC had taken after 1994. And she asked a range of probing questions around, macroeconomic policy, the policy, government policy towards Zimbabwe, and of course the big issue of AIDS denialism. And so I found these questions challenging but important and very relevant, and also found the opportunity of talking to an academic with an anti-apartheid record very useful in trying to reflect and self-critically reflect on that past. So I gave an extensive interview, two interviews. So in fact, and what then emerged in the controversy that emerged later in 2002 were in fact accurate transcripts of interviews that I'd given.
In that interview, did you disclose to her things that had been discussed at a meeting or at meetings of the National Executive Committee of the ANC?
By and large, yes. Well, by and large, no. It might be useful just to talk a little bit about the background, which unfortunately Thabo Mbeki doesn't talk about. So I gave these interviews in April of 2001 and then in January of 2002, not expecting them to become public and really thinking that the academic was wanting to use them for her own research. She put them up on a website, her own personal website, which was obscure, and I didn't pay any particular attention to the transcripts of these interviews that I'd given. I subsequently learned from someone who was in intelligence, in government intelligence services at the time, that they had picked up these interviews. They'd informed the political principals, presumably also Mbeki, about them, and had then sat on them with a view to using them at an appropriate moment. And so on a Sunday in July of 2002, I woke up to find that I was on the front page. I was the front page story of the Sunday Times. The journalists in the Sunday Times hadn't bothered to tell me. And they were basically playing a particular angle around these interviews. And they'd obviously been set up to do so and informed to do so. And it wasn't accidental, the timing. The timing was precisely a week before the SACP's National Elective Congress, which happened a week later. And clearly this was an attempt to play in a sectarian way and to try and influence the outcome of that Congress. It backfired very badly because the delegates at the SACP Congress recognized fully and fully approved overwhelmingly with the things that I had spoken about in the interviews, which included concern around macroeconomic policy, the tendency of the Mbeki inner circle to isolate trade unionists, as well as the SACP, the AIDS denialist issues, and all of those issues, which I talked about and we'd been talking about publicly before as well. Unfortunately, in the interviews, which I'd been rather too casual in some respects in some of the things I said, and I did unfortunately talk about some things that people had said in NEC meetings. So I was, out of order in that respect and apologized. And I stand by that apology for breaking with organizational discipline in those respects. But I certainly stood by and stand by the substance of what I was saying.
But, the things you had said to Dr. Sheehan, were those things that you had raised yourself personally in ANC-NEC meetings?
Yes, of course, absolutely. So there were all issues. I mean, whether it was concern around Zimbabwe policy or macroeconomic policy, I'd raised them in ANC structures, in ANC-NEC, and of course in alliance structures, and also publicly in interviews and so forth, and continue to do so after also this particular episode. So and if the intention of the Mbeki leadership at the time was to protect the good name of the ANC and so on, all they had to do was, when they had picked up that the fact that these interviews or the transcriptions of the interviews had been published, all they had to do was alert me to that, and I would have requested, obviously, Dr. Sheehan to remove them from the site. Instead, what happened is they blew them up, because the intention was not to protect ANC's good name, but to launch a witch hunt against me, and not me personally, but me as a representative of the Communist Party. Why
then did you feel or see the need to apologize if you were convinced in your own mind that what you had done was, or what the things you had said were a true reflection of the things that had happened, a true reflections of your own personal and political convictions?
Well, I didn't apologize for those. What I apologized for was the blemishes in breaking with organizational discipline. Clearly, these in the course of the interviews, I unwisely referred, not a great deal, but on occasion, to some things that people had said in confidential meetings, in meetings of the National Executive Committee. And that was out of order. I recognize that was out of order, and I apologize for that, and I stand by the apology. But the concerns around the attempts to isolate and marginalize communists and COSATU members in that period, the attempt to stamp down on any discussion of macroeconomic policy, and so on, all of those things, I had raised and continue to raise and will continue to raise.
You raised those things not because you didn't win. In other words, whatever arguments that you and like-minded people had presented at the meetings of the NEC, you simply didn't win. Perhaps you were defeated. Now you were looking for any sympathetic ear that could, in some way or the other, influence discourse and take or put out there issues that you were actually defeated on within the meetings or in meetings of the National Executive Committee.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being defeated in a democratic process, and there's nothing wrong with, at the same time, while accepting that you've been defeated in the discussion, continuing to air your views and concerns. I think it's a duty of any politician to do so. And so I'm certainly never going to apologize for opposing privatization, for opposing the AIDS, the terrible, tragic AIDS denialism, for, I think, bad missteps in the handling of the Zimbabwe crisis. I think there were many things wrong, and I was critical then. I didn't necessarily win debates that I raised, but saw my responsibility is to continue to represent what I believe to be the truth, while accepting that a majority, in some cases, but not always, had disagreed with me.
Well,
That's the nature of democracy.
I'm raising this because in a clip we played here yesterday, which was from our archive, there's a clip that we played of former President Thabo Mbeki lashing out at the South African Communist Party. I'm sure you will remember that conference conference, I think it was at Shaft 21. On day one came former President Nelson Mandela. He criticized the South African Communist Party. And then later on, I think it was Tenjiwe Mtinzo who was chairing the session. He dismissed former President Mandela's unwritten part of the speech where he lashed out at the SACP as, something unmandated position, I think were the words that she used. Then the next day, President Thabo Mbeki came. He did exactly, but he did it perhaps a little more thoroughly than President Mandela had done. You stood up, and this is where this is what I want you to respond to specifically. You stood up. And you said something about a need for a dialectical response. But in the end, you didn't say much except to acknowledge some of the things that he had said and the fact that he had been frank and had devoted his time to studying the documents, the conference documents of the SACP, and was speaking as a comrade. And you actually had good words to say, to him around what, for me, was perhaps the strongest criticism that he had made of the South African Communist Party, which then brings me to the original question that in public, where he had put his views in public, not now in meetings of the NEC, you were prepared to acknowledge and not say much. Yet inside the meetings of the NEC, where I presume your views were defeated, you were now keen to actually, sneak out something and give to a Dr. Sheehan so that she could then put those thoughts or your views out there?
There was nothing that I said to Dr. Sheehan in the interviews of substance by way of criticism that I did not say and write about and provide in interviews publicly a great deal, as well as raised within the structures both of the SACP, of the Alliance and of the ANC. So I wasn't sneaking behind any corner and into an obscure space. And in fact, I didn't expect any of that to be published or to become public. And it wouldn't have, in fact, if there hadn't have been a deliberate attempt to influence the SACP Congress in 2002, which backfired, incidentally, because the overwhelming majority of delegates fully approved of what I was saying and recognized the truth of what I was saying, which was that there'd been a systematic attempt to marginalize the SACP. And the Congress that you're referring to, which you're remembering, my response to Mbeki was measured and deliberately so, but I disagreed with him point by point with the substantive issues that he was raising by way of criticism of the party's program. Yeah.
Now, what then is your problem with what President Mbeki put out there yesterday?
My problem is not the detail. I think I wasn't angry by the letter. I was puzzled, I think, like many South Africans, as to why President Mbeki is choosing now to revisit old grudges. And I think it's extremely misguided on his part. What most concerns me, and that's the nature of the discussion we're having now as well, is that here we are, South Africans, confronting a very deep-seated crisis in our society. There's a global economic crisis which began in 2008 and which has not disappeared, although the epicenter has been moving around. I think it's common cause that we've got deep crises of unemployment, poverty, inequality. We've got a drought. We've got huge issues around students and student admissions. And I think this is time not for revisiting old grievances, but for encouraging open, constructive debate and discussion about how to reach our issues. And my concern is that we will end up in the letters, the two letters so far that Mbeki has written, take us back into the domain of palace politics, who said what, a Game of Thrones politics. And I think that is unhelpful and is not providing leadership into an important situation which requires level-headedness and a countrywide honest and constructive debate about difficult choices that we have to make.
So, his version of events is true and accurate. The only problem you have is why now? Why is he doing it when we have...
No, I'm not saying that. If you read his letter, but I don't want to get dragged into it too much. If you read his letter, he said, I apologized, which I did. I didn't apologize for the content of what I'd raised. I certainly don't agree with him that there was not a climate of intimidation that often prevailed in the NECs at the time that he chaired. I was not the only victim. In fact, a few years later, President Mbeki, former President Mandela, was singled out, and by the same chorus that had attacked me in that NEC, went for him very viciously because he'd raised some concern around HIV/AIDS and denialism. That never prevented any of us from raising our concerns in the NEC and outside of the NEC. So I disagree with Mbeki that we were intimidated, or that we claimed that we were intimidated, but there were certainly attempts to intimidate dissent and disagreement within the NEC during the Mbeki period. So to that extent, his letter I disagree with very strongly. He's quite wrong, and I think he hasn't learned the lesson. And I think the nature and character and tone of the letter that he wrote yesterday shows that all his attempts to say that he's not a bully and doesn't have, grievances and doesn't hold on to them are disproved precisely by the kind of intervention that he's making in these letters.
And you think he is a bully?
Well, I think that he does have tendencies to do so, absolutely, yes.
Now, if then you were to, I don't know how to put this. But given what happened post Pologwana to him, and the things that were said about him by, among others, leaders of the Communist Party, do you think he's completely, he's unjustified to really set the record straight if he feels there is perhaps a need to?
No, of course, right. He's perfectly entitled to, from within his own perspective, to try to set the record straight. And I certainly agree that it would be absolutely wrong to demonize President Mbeki, former President Mbeki. I think he had many positive qualities, and I think also he made some very grievous errors during his time as president, and indeed before his time as president. So I think that the Mbeki story is a mixed story, and I think it's quite wrong to simply demonize him or blame him for all problems that we're suffering. But at the same time, I think that we must all accept collective responsibility, and those of us in leadership positions must also show an inclination also to self-criticism and thoughtfulness. And I'm afraid that that's not a strong point in President Mbeki, and I think these letters are again revealing that.
Well, as the South African Communist Party collective, are you happy at the moment with everything that's going on in the country, the way the country is run, and your relationship with your ally, the ANC?
No. I think that relationship, we certainly are deeply committed to the relationship with the ANC and with COSATU, and indeed also with the civic movement. I think it's a core part of our strategic perspective. But like the ANC itself, and in its recent National General Councils and policy meetings, we believe that there are many serious challenges confronting the movement in general and the ANC in particular. So it would be wrong to say that we're happy with the alliance, and particularly with how the alliance relations are happening in some particular provinces. But these are not necessarily new problems. Alliances are complicated things, and politics is not something for sissies. But that doesn't mean that we're anti-ANC or are not deeply committed to an alliance built on a progressive and principled set of policies.
Looking at the challenges facing the alliance today, and how aggrieved you may be about over a whole range of things, how would you compare this period to that of when President Mbeki was the president of the ANC?
I think we're living through a different a global period. I think that in the heyday of the Mbeki presidency, basically neoliberalism was considered to be the only show in town. And I think that Mbeki bought into it, and I think it bought into him as well. And I think that goes a long way to explain some of the intolerance of difference and of debate, because it was not specific to former President Mbeki at the time. I mean, there was a great deal of managerial arrogance globally. There was a one-size-fits-all approach to economic and social policy. and any kind of difference or debate was frowned upon and seen as unnecessary. I think that since the 2008 global economic crisis, I think there's a much wider consensus that there are not easy choices. The reality is very complex, and that we need to respect heterodoxy, we need to respect difference and debate, and all of that is very important. So I think the situation is different. That's not to say that the challenges have diminished in South Africa.
But internally,
the unemployment crisis and so forth, remain very persistent.
But internally within the ANC and how these differences manifest themselves and how they are managed, how happy or disappointed or disgruntled are you?
I think that certainly since around 2007, 2009, I think the relationship between the alliance partners has improved considerably. That's not to say that they are not differences and they're not debates, and I think those are well known and well recorded in the public sphere. But generally, I would say the relationship has improved considerably.
Lastly, and very, very briefly, what has this episode taught you? Of course, with the benefit of hindsight as well.
Well, I think that as I said earlier, I think that it's important to respect the organizational integrity of the organizations of which we are part. And I regretted then and I regret now that some of the things I said in those interviews broke with organizational confidence. And I apologize sincerely for that. And of course, unfortunately, what it did was also open the way then for attempts to outlaw genuine views and perspectives. I believe the attempts failed, and it certainly didn't silence me in my critical views. But it opened the way for an attempt to block debate and diversity.
Well, there are people like Bantu Holomisa who posted today that you guys were vicious to people like him when the time came for people like him to actually be when they were thrown out of the ANC. Yes. Do you regret such remarks as well?
No, I think he's right, and I think I also learned something from that. I think that there was a constructive dismissal of Bantu Holomisa at the time that he was wedged out, and I think that Thabo Mbeki played quite a leading role in that respect. And in 2002, when I was confronting my particular problem, I learned the lesson. I think it was important not to stand on my personal dignity and to admit faults where there were faults, but at the same time not to back down on the principled issues and principled perspectives. So I do agree. I think there are lessons to be learned from that past, including the way in which, in my view, Bantu Holomisa and some of us played a role in that, played a role in his constructive dismissal. I mean, he was basically pushed into self-dismissal, and I think it was a mistake at the time.
Mr. Jeremy Cronin, thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
Thank
Jeremy Cronin, the first Deputy Secretary of the South African Communist Party. Well, time now to take a quick break. When we return, we have a debate between Evan Jim and Mr. Leon Lowe of the Free Market Foundation.
I'm Peter Ndoro.
And I'm Babakini Chetty Miller, SAB Miller, and Hauser Bush Imbev. It's something that I need to learn to say more often.
Will together produce around a third of the world's beer.
It is a mouthful. Have you ever considered skin bleaching?
Nigeria tops the list of African countries with 77% of its women bleaching their skin. Now I can see that it is not good because it affects my face and some of my body parts.
Thousands of Arab Israelis and Palestinians participated in a big rally.
Flight MH17 was shot down by a Russian-made missile.
How those chips may fall is a prediction best left to the currency of time.
That's Primetime News, Africa Journal, and Your World on SABC News.
Media Monitor, your weekly media news review program.
It was squashed some few months back, but obviously this is something that is going to hang around Pravin until it is actually dealt with. If he didn't know, then he wasn't doing his job.
In it, she described how the man's hair was frozen, although the man has no hair.
Is anybody volunteering to go to jail for him? That is not how the law works.
This particular matter makes us really look like a serious banana republic.
Unpacking headlines and giving analysis on topical issues. Sundays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
As stories are broken around the world, SABC makes sure you do not miss out. As the stories unfold throughout the day, News at 8 updates all newsworthy stories worldwide. Globally, we are there. Locally, we leave no story untold. Make a date with News at 8 every Saturday and Sunday on SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Welcome back, and if you've just joined us, you're watching On The Record. Well, I'm joined here in the studio for the second part of the program by Leon Lowe of the Free Market Foundation. Welcome, sir, and thanks very much for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Vuyo.
And from our Cape Town studios, we are joined by Evan Jim, who is the General Secretary of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. Welcome to you too, sir.
Good evening, Vuyo. Good evening to listeners.
Well, for those who didn't hear it, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa today held a press briefing. The working class is under attack. That, at least, is the contention that they are making, that the workers are under attack on all fronts in the workplace, in their communities. While wealth and power remains in the hands of mainly white capitalists, while the overwhelming majority see no way out of poverty and marginalization. Explain to us, Mr. Jim, how you arrived at that particular conclusion.
Well, I think for the past 2 decades, we are now 22 years since what was characterized as a democratic breakthrough has failed to deliver to the working class and the poor of this country. When we took over power, we were very optimistic that this was the end of the system that have basically relegated us to the status of being subhuman. Black people in general have been at the bottom of the food chain during the apartheid era. And we learned after the breakthrough that despite our celebration that for the first time that black people in general, Africans have voted, we learned that basically what we secured was political power without economic power. And the liberation forces that fought to bring us to 1994, one of the things, for instance, that was raised very sharply in Morogoro years back in 1969 was that to allow existing economic condition intact was to allow the root of racial supremacy to continue, and it would have meant a shadow of a liberation. I guess the failure, therefore, by the current ANC government, its leadership, in succession to address issues of ownership and control of the economy have led to a situation where today we're reaping mass poverty, mass unemployment, and huge inequality, and we remain at the bottom of the food chain. And it is true that wealth, and I think Oxfam report, which you said we must discuss, is a demonstration of this, that this is not just a problem of greed that is just South African in character. About 62 individuals own the half of the wealth. So this is a crisis, Will.
Did the ANC government do this because it's what they wanted to do, or were they forced by powerful, shall we call them, external forces who were more powerful than it?
I think the question lies on how do we understand the ANC. I mean, we have always understood the ANC as a liberation movement, which is a multi-class formation. In it, it's got capitalist. In it, it's got communist and everybody else. I think that there has been this vision from communists that one day, if the working class is the motive force of the revolution, as the ANC says so, a possibility exists that we can pull a revolutionary agenda to change relations of production in the interests of the working class. But I must say that we completely failed. The capitalist class has won the power relations in the ANC and everything else. And they did this very well. And I think they are together with multinationals. They act in the interests of white monopoly capital. And that's why white monopoly capital is the beneficiary of the wealth of this country.
Mr. Lowe, why are the poor getting poorer and the rich getting richer?
Well, that's not in fact the case, either in South Africa or the world. This Oxfam report is one of the greatest travesties of research that you can ever imagine. I could just touch on some of the absurdities in it. Just to give you an example, what they do is they calculate the wealth of somebody, and this word wealth is misused, by deducting debt. Now, what that means is that if you go and buy your brand new luxury car and you drive home to your brand new luxury residence and you have debt, then you are, according to Oxfam, a poor person compared to the person who you give a 50 or 5 rand tip to at the intersection.
And you disagree?
Well, that's obviously nonsense. It's obviously nonsense that rich people with debt can't be called poor, and poor people with a little bit of wealth can't be called rich. That's what they do, and that's how they get these absurd numbers, which are actually so obviously absurd one shouldn't even have to talk about them.
But let's leave numbers for a second.
Yeah.
Are you dismissing suggestions, or what many people would say, the reality that a lot of people are just getting richer, while many people are getting poorer?
Yes,
it's there for everyone to see.
No, quite the opposite. The figures are actually quite staggering. The United Nations defined poverty in the 1970s as earning less than $1 a day, or living on less than the equivalent of $1 a day. If you inflation adjust that, then the number of people called poor has collapsed from about 1/3 of all human beings on Earth to less than 10% of all human beings on Earth. In other words, poverty as objectively defined has virtually vanished from the planet. This is clear from all sorts of readily available statistics. Everyone should know this. Anyone who knows anything should know this. Life expectancy has gone up from something like 40 to about 65 years. There's a convergence of poor people with rich people all over the world, including South Africa.
So poverty is diminishing?
Massively. Poor people in South Africa have access to services, government services, motorized transport, running hot and cold water, the electricity, and so on and so forth.
And that means they're no longer poor?
No, it means that the quality of life of poor people all over the world has risen spectacularly, to the point where instead of carrying on about it, we should celebrate the conquest of poverty. That is really what should happen now if you look at the objective numbers.
Evan, Jim, do you agree?
No, but I mean, you know, to argue with him is always a waste of time, because I think he lives in Mars. The reality of the situation is that people in this country are facing abject poverty. There are statistics that have been pushed now recently by both Stats SA. In fact, Stats SA is being questioned by the UCT University Tree academics. They are basically raising the fact that about 63% of the people are nowhere closer to where they're supposed to be in jobs. And unemployment is huge. Poverty is ravaging. And I don't know what anybody can say that poverty is diminishing from what, when in fact we are on the verge of a junk status in terms of the economy. And that's why I'm saying there are people which you continue to bring them, but these people live in their own world. All what they seek to do into any report is to find all technicalities to dismiss what is going to explode. We're sitting over a time bomb here.
Do you deny that?
I don't need to deny it. You know, we can have an
Not that
opinion.
we're sitting on a time bomb.
No, I think we're not. This is again, you know, the actual life of ordinary people. I personally move in and out of maybe the lowest income areas, the West Bank of Alex and so on, more than maybe Mr. Jim. But it doesn't really matter. And I can go to community meetings in Alex, I can go to them, I can go to big taverns in Khayelitsha, I can go all over the country, everywhere, and all I find is friendship and warmth, and I don't find this thing on the ground at all. This is a fabrication and a fantasy of intellectuals, like this chap, this French guy, Piketty, for example, who says there is growing conflict in the world over inequality. He produces in a book full of statistics, 800 pages of data, not one single statistic to the effect that there is growing conflict or resentment in the world. Now, there firstly is, let's get this very clear, there is declining inequality. The poor living standards are rising as an objective fact. Now, somebody might not like that as a matter of opinion. That is what the statistics tell you. In South Africa, you can see the number of people who've moved out of shacks into houses, RDP houses, for example. You can see the number of people of all races who have bank accounts. The so-called black middle class is now 5 or 6 million South Africans, up from less than 1 million South Africans in '94. That is to say, it is now, and that includes you, it is now bigger than the total number of white South Africans. And so, yes, the fact is not debatable. The facts are that the living standards of the poor on planet Earth and in South Africa have risen astonishingly. Now, let me make this point about post-94. It astounds me that people can say that the South African government, ANC, and I'm not an ANC supporter or whatever, I did do courier work for the ANC and I was in the anti-apartheid movement, but nonetheless it doesn't mean that I'm particularly here to represent the ANC. But let me just say, for somebody to suggest that the ANC government in 20 years is no better than the crime against humanity, apartheid, that you can have a black South African government, liberated black South Africans, and they have not benefited, and that it is as bad as apartheid. That is a racist statement. It's an extraordinary statement about the ANC. I find it astonishing that anybody can even begin to say that. Whatever mistakes the ANC has made, whatever mistakes the members of the alliance like NUMSA, Mr. Jim, have made, whatever mistakes they've made, to say that there has been no rise in the quality of life of black South Africans. I mean, you don't need to look at the statistics, which I do. You just have to open your eyes. Research by looking. It's so obvious wherever you go that there has been a spectacular improvement by black people as a result of embracing their liberty politically and economically, and that should be praised and lauded, and I find it absolutely amazing we should be having this discussion to the effect that apartheid that the ANC is as bad as apartheid. That's an astonishing thought.
Mr. Jim, the lives of the workers you are leading have improved spectacularly.
Thanks to you. You should take credit for it, Mr. Jim. What you've achieved.
You see, I think, to be brutally honest, I think what drives this argument from Market Foundation is nothing less than a stinking racism, if I were to say that. I think that this is a propaganda that is coined with insults to think that black people in general, Africans in particular, were ravaged by mass unemployment, inequality, who don't have jobs. The fact that today we could not have students at the beginning of this year starting their careers to be able to register, the first thing they have to do is to go to the streets and fight. The fact that as we speak, we've got roads that are being privatized. The fact that labor brokers, which the organization he represents, basically accept that workers must continue to be super exploited. The fact that the gap between black workers, which are ordinary workers, and CEOs is more than 1,728 times in this country. And we have somebody to come comfortable into the public debate to say the lives of black Africans is improving when they are at the bottom of the food chain. And he comes and tells us that all the statistics There's no organization. Stats SA statistics are wrong, and Oxfam statistics are technically fault and they are wrong. Where does he live? I mean, that's a fundamental question, and I'm saying this is a now open and now hidden racism, because the reality of the matter is that the people who are languishing in poverty, in unemployment, who are being ravaged, they are black and African.
So, just by the way, I did not query Stats SA statistics at all. In fact, I rely on them. It's their statistics that
So on
tell
what
us.
basis do you say anybody can live under those statistics?
It's their statistics that tell us about the number of people who have houses, the rising life expectancy, the number of literate people that have multiplied manyfold, the number of people with degrees, the fact that 70% of students in the private schools are now black South Africans, the fact that 90% of teachers are now qualified, the improvement in the quality of life. And anyone who wants to see the statistics, by the way, should look at the presidency, which has published a 20-year review, a thing called the 20-year review, which has all the statistics from South African Statistical Services, the South African government, which has mountains of statistics about how the quality of life of South Africans has improved. And that, let me immediately say, the unemployed and destitute South Africans, these ought to worry us terribly. So I absolutely agree with Mr. Jim about that problem. And what we need is policies that are going to give those people the same chance that others have had and enjoyed. But I'm using the South African government statistics, I'm using the presidency statistics. Anybody can download the 20-year review off the internet. It's very easy, and it's produced by the Department of Statistical Services. So that's Stats SA's data. The one I queried is Oxfam. Oxfam is a different story. It is a charity which raises money to fight poverty, and its agenda is to maximize the belief that there is poverty in order to raise more money. That's what it does. Its own directors, by the way, earn between 2 and 3 million rand a year, so it's a very wealthy business. But its job is to exaggerate and propagandize the level of poverty in the world. It doesn't talk or care about South Africa. And even though billions of human beings in China and India and Indonesia and Brazil and all over Africa, most of sub-Saharan Africa is now the highest growth region in the world, billions of human beings have been rising out of poverty. And Oxfam is becoming more and more hysterical in its attempt to continue to say that there's poverty when in fact it's being alleviated on a scale that calls for global celebration of the defeat of the success of the war against poverty on the global scale. I'm talking about the world. South Africa is a different story, and here I am referring to the government's own data. The data from the presidency tells you about the really quite impressive accomplishment after '94, which we as South Africans are entitled to be proud of.
Mr. Jim, aren't you perhaps, just listening to Mr. Lowe, isn't he in fact, or perhaps articulating perhaps the same views that the bosses you negotiate with on a regular basis actually have, except that they do not have the guts or the courage to actually say it as he is putting it?
Well, there is a group led by the organization that he leads that basically progress is defined on the basis that we must go for sweatshop condition. Workers must not be paid a living wage, against the backdrop that workers' share of the national income has drastically dropped in this country. And they are every day having to take the responsibility of more than 5 extended families who don't have a plate of food. And from where we stand, we completely differ. In fact, I want to confirm that Oxfam statistics, there's no argument that has been delivered here that can dispute that about the fact that 62 individuals, not group, individuals, globally, they own the half of the people of the wealth of the world. And this is the reality. This is the greed of capitalism. It knows no friend. It knows no relative. What it knows is maximization of profit. In that process, it continues to soldier on the basis of mergers, acquisition, and it's a system of greed. And it employs people like him to continue to present our own reality on the basis that the working class should be satisfied. In fact, they want more conservative government that basically take away the capacity of workers and the working class in general to fight and to improve their conditions.
Well, what should we expect this year from leaders, working class leaders like you, from organizations or trade unions like NUMSA that comprise of workers? What should we expect from you this year? A year that you've identified as a year on which the working class is under attack.
I think our work is cut out. We have neoliberal policies that have basically pushed the South African economy to a junk status. And you would remember that we campaigned for years that GEAR, which is growth, employment, and redistribution, when you hear it being said, you think that everything is fine, but the devil is on the detail, because money leaves this country through capital flight because we've relaxed exchange control. The fact that we are losing jobs, as the year was coming to an end, we nearly lost the whole steel industry. And as we speak, in the mining industry, in all our sectors, we're fighting Section 189 because we're losing jobs. And these neoliberal policies where the state does not intervene in the economy and address issues of ownership and control of our strategic minerals to make sure that they are beneficiated to create jobs. And now, having failed to address social security net, having failed to deal with apartheid colonial wage, and the fact that workers are not having a living wage, in this country, there's no national health care system that can take care of the bulk majority who are languishing in poverty, who can't take their children to decent schools so that they can be able to break new ground to take those families in poverty. We are left with absolutely no option, Vuyo, but to struggle, because the only guarantee for change is class struggle. Today, because the president would have signed an act that now takes the retirements of workers and take away their deferred wages, we are left with no option but to mobilize the working class to the street to fight to defend their provident fund. And in fact, we're making a call that that act must be repealed. But let's face it, we can't rely to market foundation on all right-wing political parties led by DA and the ANC. The working class must stand up. It must form a united front between two axes, the working class, the youth communities, to struggle to defend the gains and to improve the condition. Okay. But it's also time to crystallize a new political organ that must act in the interests of the working class and the poor. That's what our bodies and soul are going to be dedicated in this year.
Mr. Low, it looks like, from what, if Mr. Jim is to be believed, business, government, everyone is in for a big fight.
Yes, I expect that. And, he's quite wrong if he thinks that the Free Market Foundation is against the working class or the unions. Quite the contrary. We are 100% for them. We actually would like to see their numbers multiply manyfold by the unemployed people getting jobs and joining them. And he and his union does exactly what they should do, which is to represent the interests of their members. Those are the people with jobs in their sector. They are not in a position to represent the people outside that sector, and they are particularly not in a position to represent the serious problem of unemployment. And if the unions instead could collaborate with people who have sound economic policies to propose, that's us, and then say, how can we get the unemployed employed, and they will become their members, and then NUMSA will actually like the Free Market Foundation for making them bigger and stronger. We are not in any sense against them. That is quite wrong.
Mr. Jim, lastly and very briefly, I can't resist this, even though we've run out of time. When are you launching your party, and are you contesting the local government elections?
Well, first, I think we must be upfront that everybody must know in South Africa that we got disputes where workers' wages have been improved. We've secured an agreement with employers. It is the Market Foundation. This fellow who's now being appointed by DA to contest for mayorship in Gauteng, he has signed all dispute challenging all wages negotiated agreement. So it's fallacy. I reject it with contempt that Market Foundation is for workers. In fact, it together with DA, they are political axis of a class that exploit the working class. We will mobilize the working class, and yes, you're right, we're launching the United Front. In some areas in the country, The United Front structures have gone ahead to register to conduct local government election. NUMSA in its own structures will be resolving when do we launch the United Front and how do we move forward to crystallize the political organ in the interest of the working class and the poor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evan, Jim, Mr. Lowe.
Thank you very
much for
Mr. Jim.
a good discussion this evening. Well, before we go, earlier today, DA leader Mmusi Maimane addressed an open forum for journalists and party members in Johannesburg. In recent months, the party has been rocked by racism-linked controversies. Comparing race relations in a country to a marriage, Maimane reiterated that the future of South Africa will have to be built on racial equality. We'll leave you with an excerpt of what very well may be his version of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. Good night.
Apartheid may be history, but the racism that nurtured and sustained it continues to this day. South Africans, racism demeans us, all of us, black and white. It opens the wounds of its victims and exposes the ignorance of those who perpetrated. It robs us of the dignity that so many fought for. And racism divides us. Just look at us. At the very moment we need to be standing together, we're being torn apart. It doesn't have to be this way. And when I look back, I still at times marvel at what we've achieved together. Many. In fact, some said we had no chance. They said our history was just too unfair. It was just too brutal. They said that the scars inflicted by centuries of colonial rule and half a century of apartheid laws were just too deep. They said forgiveness and reconciliation were impossible. And then came along a leader who taught us that our scars would not be healed by more hatred, but only by love and understanding. The humble man, incarcerated for 27 years for fighting against racial domination, was the embodiment of forgiveness and reconciliation. He urged each one of us to look beyond our differences and find our common humanity. And so we did. Like in a marriage, we made a commitment to each other. Our antenuptial agreement was the constitution that was signed 20 years ago on the 8th of May, 1996. On that day, we vowed to respect each other. We vowed to grow old together. We vowed to stick together through thick and thin, in sickness and in health. At first, our relationship flourished. We celebrated each other's successes as if they were our own. But when tragedy struck, we mourned together. But when the honeymoon ended, we found that we hardly knew each other. Now, after 2 decades, we sometimes struggle to recall what we saw in each other in the first place. Because 2 decades into a new democracy, it does feel as though we are drifting apart again.